So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Keith Howard. I'm the Director of User Experience for Magento. So I have been designing applications for many years for companies like Magento, Google, and Dell. And today I'm actually responsible for all of Magento's interfaces, so digital commerce, commerce order management, and all of our other products. So the workshop lasts 2 hours. I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the Magento 2.0 launch. I also have a story to share with you from the recent, or for the upcoming Magento 2.1 launch, which I think illustrates pretty well how we like to solve problems as a design team. Later, Eric's going to come up and start to dive a little bit deeper into the different phases of the process we use to solve design challenges. And then we have a workshop component to this as well. You'll notice the workbooks at your desk, your table, sorry. We'll use this for the second half of the session. And so we'll go through the workbook later. We'll take a break, 10 minutes in the middle, but again, considering the size of this group, we can have a little flexibility to that, and I expect us to finish more quickly. Any questions before we get started? Awesome, all right. If you have any questions with this small group, we will be able to field questions during the actual session, so don't hesitate to hold up your hand and ask us a question. So first, let me tell you about the Magento 2.0 launch. So in November of 2015, we announced the general availability of Magento 2.0. This is a really proud moment for us as a company. You know, it represented the culmination of hundreds of employees, several years of effort to get to that point, and it makes major architectural improvements to Magento, making it more scalable, more flexible, more secure. And but it's not just the architecture that received improvements for that launch. We also made enhancements to the user experience. This is the administration panel for Magento in 1.14. This is the exact same screen in Magento 2.0. You can see we modernized it. We made it easier to read, easier to scan, find your information, and make updates to the product. Now, as always, when the product launched, we were quick to get feedback online. This one's from Kalen Jordan, and he tweeted about how happy he is with the speed and the new styling. And so we're very flattered by this, so thank you, Kalen. But it's not just the surface that we work on. It's my job to make sure that Magento is as easy to use as possible without sacrificing any of the performance and flexibility that you expect from Magento. And we do that by using a process called design thinking. Now, it is a process for solving problems. Designers have been working this way for many years, but what's happened recently is that several key players like Stanford's Design School and IDEO have taken these methods and they've refined them and they've put them into a repeatable series of steps into a framework called design thinking. And with a little training, anyone can use this technique to solve problems. Designers have been working this way for many years, and these different terms represent some of the ways that designers have worked traditionally. Now, what's important to note is that all of the lessons learned from these techniques have been refined and applied to the method of design thinking. So let me share with you a story from the upcoming release of Magento 2.1. My team was asked to design a new feature called staging. And what staging allows you to do is schedule updates to the site. Any piece of content, be it a product, a promotion, an image, a content page, category, you can schedule changes to go live at any moment in the future and schedule them to expire at any point in the future. So no more working evenings and weekends unless that's what you enjoy doing. So you don't have to stay late now to launch something late. Now, this is a really important feature for us, and we started some time ago, actually over a year. And we did extensive research and planning, mapping, designing this feature out. This is our normal process. And at some point, we reached a draft design. And as always, we expect to find opportunities to improve the design. This is natural. We can always make things better. So what we do is we, at this point in the process, take our design to users for feedback, looking for opportunities to make it better. Now, we built a prototype. And a prototype is just a simulation of this design that people can use. It makes it feel like the system is actually working. And we took it to 10 merchants to test it. And it didn't go well. What we found was that the design had many problems. Users actually struggled to complete their task, and in their feedback they said they were very frustrated. So I've been doing this for a long time, and I actually can't remember any design, any first draft of any of my designs performing so poorly. And so I was shocked and frankly a little embarrassed. So we're all friends now. I hope you keep it between us. After each task, we actually ask people to score us on how easy it was to use and how they're feeling about it. These scores are actually very, very low. And so normally at this point in the process, we'd say we have minor tweaks to make the design to finish it. Instead, I decided to abandon the design. I scrapped it, and we decided to start over. Now, after several months of work, we tested the new design again, with many of the same people asking the exact same questions. And this was the result. Dramatic improvement in the test scores. What's more, the feedback also reflected that. One of my favorite pieces of feedback is when people ask me how soon they can start using it. This means they can actually visualize using this feature and they understand how it's going to make their life better. So it was the same design team facing the same design challenge. We tested many of the same people. We asked them exactly the exact same questions. So what changed from design 1 to design 2? When we went back and we started looking at our initial research, we realized we'd made a mistake. We'd talked to too many users of the current staging system. And it turns out that the users of the current staging system happen to be very technically savvy users. So they're quite often more developer type oriented roles. They're very technically savvy. And so when we designed the system, when we did our research, we actually had included too many technical users, not enough non-technical users. The result was we had a design that actually worked pretty well for technical users, but non-technical users struggled. Obviously, we're designing a system that we want everybody to be able to use. So when we went back with this updated research information, we designed the system first for the non-technical user, and we achieved the design that worked well for the technical and non-technical users as a result. This is an example screen from the Magento 2.1 release coming up. And you can see here that on this Nike shoe, they've scheduled an update, and at some point in the future, you're going to see a change to this product. And so you can clearly see what changes are coming, and you can easily access and make changes to that future change. Using this interface, all of our test participants were able to successfully complete all the tasks, and they reported high satisfaction when they did so. But there was more. So when we started talking to these merchants, we started to get a sense of what their daily life was like. And we heard story after story about managing simultaneously running campaigns in parallel with hundreds of products and these different start dates and all of these different assets and other things coming in and out with these promotions. And it was really easy for them to lose track of this and start to jumble this up. And so we came up with an idea. We designed this, a staging dashboard, which provided this visual representation of the campaigns when they were starting and when they were stopping. And you can easily access them and modify those campaigns using this interface. Now, it's important to note, engineering didn't ask us for this design. The product team didn't ask us for this design. When we talked to merchants, we thought it would be a good idea. And ultimately, enough of them told us so, and so much positive feedback came from this design, we were ultimately able to get it included in the upcoming Magento 2.1 release. And I'm happy to say it is launching with 2.1, and I've already been seeing draft versions of this. And so we're very pleased with the result. So what did we accomplish? We avoided an expensive mistake. It would have cost us just as much money as a company to build the bad design as the good one. What's more, we made staging easier to use, and we know you will find it easier to use and more enjoyable to use because you've told us so. And what's more, we discovered new opportunities to make staging that much more beneficial and helpful to you. And we did all of this by using design thinking. So I hope I've given you a good idea about how design thinking can help you solve problems. In the short time we have today, I can't possibly teach you in detail how to do this, but we can give you an introduction. I'd like Eric to come up now and give you an introduction to the various phases that we use in design thinking. After that, we'll follow up and do some individual workbook steps where we can practice in the time that we have together. Okay, thank you, Eric.
Hi everybody, my name is Eric Irway. I'm a UX manager for the new Commerce Order Management product. So thank you again for joining us this afternoon. So let's talk a little bit about the process that supported everything that Keith had just talked about. So it's about design thinking. So what exactly is design thinking? So simply put, design thinking is a process for innovation. It's about your customers and their needs. It gives us a method to quickly test our ideas before moving forward with the very best of them. So why should we use it? Reality is it's not just for designers. It's for store owners, engineers, marketing professionals. Anybody can really use this process. No formal training or technology is needed. Design thinking will ensure that your customers get great experiences while saving you both time and money. And while it does take time to master, the reality is you'll start to see the results pretty early in the adoption phase, which is great news. I love this example. So these should look pretty familiar too. On the left, these are essentially examples if you do not use design thinking. Things if, what might happen, what could have been involved with additional feedback. Example on the left, this happened a lot before universal remote controls. You'll see a lot of telltale signs that this experience, this interface needs some help. Clearly some notes here to turn the TV on and off. This may be one, two of many, many remote controls. You're trying to control the TV, the satellite, the stereo, all of which is even more difficult when you're trying to show somebody else how to use it. Fortunately, companies like Logitech have addressed this need head on. People are slow to adapt, but even nowadays, this problem isn't completely fixed. You're really still dependent on some things to work out. And again, you'll see a lot of these workarounds to make that happen. On the right, again, imagine a world without design thinking. Classic subway station, right? You're trying to catch a train. You've got 5 minutes. And you're faced with an interface like this. Where do you even start? Push here to start. Okay. Well, no, wait. Press this gray box first. I'm not really, wait, the gray box is over there. Which gray box are you talking about? That's kind of gray in some respect. How about credit cards? I want to pay with a credit card. Look in lower right. Wait, I'm going to use a credit card. No, we can't use the credit card. And so at some point you just want to give up. And so I think, if you look at how this process can make these types of things better, imagine a world where the people who created these initially watched people using them, really understood the problems that they were trying to solve for, created some ideas around it, tested them very quickly, it wouldn't take much, and then begin to implement them in the next phase. So you too would be saved from these type of workarounds as a result. So these are two favorites of mine in a world without design thinking. So what are the 5 phases? Again, this is the process that's standard. A lot of companies use it, and the phases themselves are the same. Let's start with empathize. Empathize is really just about understanding your users and the problem itself. Define, let's take that data and synthesize it. Let's understand the root cause. Ideate, let's brainstorm those solutions to those problems identified. Prototype, let's put these ideas in action, build a simulation, and understand what happens. And of course, test, let's take that prototype we just talked about and evaluate your design to make sure it actually works. And so those are, again, at its highest level, that's what design thinking is all about. So many of you might be asking, so what about Agile? That looked pretty linear on the previous slide. The reality is Agile works extremely well with design thinking. The goals are essentially the same. Focus on the customer, make quick iterations, and know that, in fact, the first iteration will rarely be the optimal solution. Comes back into that kind of MVP type of mentality. So Agile works extremely well, and it really allows you to time box a lot of these activities that happen in each of these phases. So we use Agile wholeheartedly at Magento, regardless of the products. And so we apply this quite a bit within Keith's organization. So as you start to use design thinking, consider the number of ideas that happen in each of the stages that I just talked about briefly. Those number of ideas will change. And you'll see here a visual that really begins to explain the concept of what we like to call divergent and convergent thinking. The reality is it's just the number of ideas. So in empathize, again, you're thinking about the problems of the customer. You've got a lot of problems. You're building those problems. Then you're going to define, you're starting to frame those, you're starting to cluster those and make meaningful problem statements around those. Get to the root cause. Ideate. Okay, we've already narrowed them down. We're going to open that up again, and we're going to want to really start thinking about creative solutions for those. Bring that back down into prototype. We're converging again, because typically resources are limited, depending on no matter how you create a prototype. And at the end, you're going to converge one more time, bring it down to test, and move forward with that one great idea. That's what we're trying to do, and that's the idea of divergent and convergent thinking. You'll hear about that throughout the workshop. So by using divergent and convergent thinking, it allows us to enable maximum creativity while simultaneously driving for results. So that was design thinking at a 10,000-foot level. So no surprise, design thinking starts with your customer. It's going to start with empathize. Empathize is the first phase of design thinking. Empathize is about gaining that deep understanding of people's needs, and it's creating meaningful solutions with those. So has anybody here actually spent time observing customers using your site, your product? If you have you done it enough? Do you do it as much as you'd like to? Reality is that we don't often make time or make enough time to spend time watching people use it. Empathize has a lot to do with that. Empathize is about looking at the problem from an entirely customer perspective. You've got to think like them to solve for their problems. And as a result, you'll generate these hypotheses in the stage, which you'll see by the divergent section of the diagram. So you're saying to yourself, well, how do I get started? So, well, it starts with having a beginner's mind. And so what do we mean by that? In most cases, again, we're not the customer. We might be selling products that we're familiar with, but maybe not as familiar with as our product. We may be designing products that we are familiar with, but not as much as what we would use on a day-to-day basis. You're going to need to separate yourself, your experience, and your expertise from whom you're designing this for. So again, imagine your site being used for the very first time. That's the perspective that we're trying to get to. So have you ever seen your product, ever seen your website used in a real environment? It's important to think beyond the office and truly get out of the building at times. So companies like Disney do this all the time. There's been some recent write-ups about how when they've developed the latest version of their site and their apps, they've actually created a family room setup inside of a warehouse at one of the studios, either California or Florida. And they bring in a typical family to actually use their products and to be able to do straightforward tasks like booking a vacation, getting tickets online, and really simulating that environment to the utmost detail. The reality is, if you're creating a website about coffee shops, you should probably spend time in coffee shops. Context and environment are really valuable to help you create empathy for your customers. So get out of the building. As Keith mentioned earlier with Magento 2, it's more important than ever to make sure you've got a broad sample of potential users. While you might have 80% of those accounted for, make sure you understand the extreme needs on both ends of the spectrum. So inspiration can come from many places. So if you've ever been to a Genius bar within one of the Apple stores, you'll start to get this feeling that you're in a high-end luxury hotel. The reality is it's not a coincidence. Apple spent quite a bit of time really recreating that experience and really getting people out of the mindset of what is a typical technical support type of experience. They were able to get that empathy through something very different. And if you feel like you're stuck, try looking at your problems, try looking at your business from a completely different perspective. You'll be surprised with the results. So now that we have a couple perspectives, it's important to define your target audience. Remember, we need to think broadly and also from multiple perspectives. So who's going to use our solution? What are their pain points? And how are we currently solving for those needs? Once the target audience is defined, there are many tools and methods to help build empathy. Interviews and contextual research can be some of the most helpful, and we'll start talking about that a little bit more in the hands-on portion of the workshop. Group and semi-structured interviews are also really, really valuable. We'll talk about a different form of that in the test section or the test phase of design thinking. But in reality, it's really about having conversation with your target customers. It's about talking about their needs, their goals, their problems. It's less so about what they do. It's really about abstracting them away from the products themselves and really getting to the root cause. And so these types of interviews, which we use quite a bit within the Magento team, are quite useful upstream in a process because in reality it's early. The repercussions are much smaller. You're just having a conversation, and in many cases you can bring that same design back to these folks to get even more additional feedback. So those are all really good. Contextual research is also great too. So we talked a little bit about getting out of the building, and so observing customers in their real environment is all about contextual research. So actually watching them in their environment or a competitor's environment, whatever that might be, something similar to that, to actually see them do it, it goes a long way, and there's a lot of insights that can be gained from this phase of the project. So that covers the basics of empathize. It's really about observing. So let's move on to the define phase. This is the second step in design thinking. So we're back to this diagram again. At this point, we're starting to converge. So define really is about collecting the information. We've just started capturing quite a bit of it from the empathize phase, and we want to see that challenge in a meaningful way. It's about identifying and documenting those needs early in the requirements process. As you can see, again, we're starting to narrow these down. You're starting to group them in a way that you're building off those hypotheses and maybe even getting closer to a root cause. So that's extremely important. Very often, teams move too quickly through this part of design thinking, and so I can't stress enough that we should, that you should spend time in that and really give it the attention that it deserves. Again, why is this important? It's important that you spend time so that you're thinking through the right problem, the correct problem. So solving for that wrong problem is costly. There's many, many examples of that, especially with later iterations of the project. The longer it takes, especially after launch, the harder and more costly those mistakes can be. So if you think about those problems up front, you get to that root cause, you really start to understand what it needs to take to start beginning to create those ideas, the better off that you're going to be. In terms of methods, there are many ways to make this happen and to process that data from empathize. So customer problem statements often ask questions like who, what, and how. Customer journey maps begin to visually create a shared understanding of both customer interactions and touch points across a typical product or customer lifecycle. Conducting a root cause analysis is also very popular. We do that quite a bit using the 5 whys method. 5 whys method, if you've never heard of it or done it before, is simply asking the question why 5 times. So I get that quite a bit from my daughters at home. They're both 5. They're all 5, 8, and 11. Pretty effective at the house, both in the home and office as well. So conducting root cause analysis is important. There's some pretty easy ways to do that. We'll see that firsthand in the activity section. And then lastly, concept models are especially useful. Again, anything that visualizes and summarizes and gets people on the same page is really important to do so. It's not only defining it, but it's that consensus building that really makes define what it is. We talked a little bit about customer journey maps already, but again, it's a visual way to create that shared understanding. We'll go through a more detailed one in the activities, but in reality, especially in a commerce situation, you'll want to take a look at and understand a customer's perspective across all stages of the life cycle. Maybe you're looking at their consideration even before searching. Maybe you want to include cross-channel, phone, other touch points in that experience. Are they positive? Are they negative? What are the supporting details around that? And so everyone will have a different framework to work from, but the idea is, again, taking all of that data, putting it into a visual, typically on a single piece of paper, maybe it's rather large, and creating an action plan around it. Those are the basics of define. Now that we have things defined, let's start generating ideas in the idea phase. So ideate is about taking the problem you just defined and creating many, many ideas to solve it. It's about finding a problem and letting your creativity go wild. Generating lots of ideas is also very helpful to begin removing filters from the process, begin to remove filters from your own thinking. Very often we're our own enemy when it comes down to it. The reality is there's no bad ideas. You're trying to think through and come up with these ideas as quickly as possible to create those, what we call creative leaps. So it's basically creating an idea from that, an idea from that. And very often after a couple of iterations fairly quickly, you'll begin to see some breakthroughs. And they really, in the end, become more deep, meaningful concepts. What might this look like on a chart? We may have some business folks in the audience, and so the reality is those ideas, especially when you create them in numbers, so imagine those over time or imagine those over the number of ideas. Maybe you create 10, maybe you create 100 of them. They're going to range pretty wildly, quite honestly. You'll start off very boring. You'll start off very, very safe. And then you're going to range quite a bit from absurd to brilliant and back again. So through some of the techniques, you'll begin to see those variations. And when you do so, you know you're doing it right. Again, it's about, in many cases, generating quantity and then spending time later to evaluate the quality. So how do we do this? There's 4 major methods that you can do this. Rapid sketching, it's also known as crazy eights. This is pretty popular. A lot of companies that Keith had mentioned, like Google and others, use this as a means to, again, quickly get through some breakthroughs in thinking, breakthroughs in ideation. And it's as simple as taking a single piece of paper, could be 8.5 by 11, could be 11 by 17, could be A4 for those of you in Europe as well. So taking that, folding it in eight ways, and actually sketching 8 ideas one at a time, 30 seconds each sketch. And so by the end, about 5 minutes, you'll have 8 ideas to work from. Now, reality is they'll vary from absurd to brilliant pretty quickly, but as you compare with the others, you'll be surprised at the results. Process flows, for those of you who are on product teams, pretty traditional, but also give you a very structured way to understand kind of what happens when and any of the dependencies that might happen as a result of that. Active brainstorming, this is probably something you've done as well, but the big point on this one is make sure it gets captured, make sure it gets structured. There's nothing worse than having a great brainstorming session and nothing comes out of it. And so there's a lot of techniques out there, using clustering methods, using Post-its and such, to really start to begin to hone in on what those key concepts are. So I'd make sure you do that, and when you do it, make sure you're spending time planning ahead instead of just kind of whiteboarding on a whim. So that's really important. But you're building off that collective energy of the group. The last one you may not have heard of, but you've probably heard of examples in the past, is participatory co-design. Sounds like a fancy term, but the reality is it's about designing with your customers, actually with your customers. And there's a lot of good examples out there, especially in education, where agencies will come in to solve for a solution, let's say for an elementary school. So they'll sit down with the students themselves and actually design the solution together. They might even do something like Crazy Eights. It's kind of fun for people who don't do this regularly. And they come up with a solution together, and you get a lot of meaningful insights from designers and non-designers alike as part of it. And so, again, if you're looking for different ways to do this, there's a lot of different methods to do this. These are just a few. So now we've got a lot of ideas. So what do we do next? Well, it's time to prototype those. This is the next phase of the process. The prototype phase is about creating a understanding about these ideas, using a simulation or a prototype to do it. The reality is it doesn't have to be a fully built out product. Prototypes are faster, cheaper, and easier to build than the real product. The cost of making a mistake, much like when we're talking about with Define, is much higher later in the project or even after the launch itself. And so spending the right amount of time with this is really important before you get too far along in your process. So let's talk about a couple different ways you can prototype. So here's some examples of what we like to call low fidelity or essentially low detail prototypes. On the left, you see an early example of a wireframe that we were able to make interactive using some basic HTML. But in reality, you can do this with PowerPoint. You can do this with Adobe Acrobat, Acture, whatever you're comfortable in, to begin to understand the mechanics, to begin to understand the interactions of the interface. On the right, using a simple piece of paper and what appears to be a cutout version of a phone, you can simulate scrolling. You can simulate a device in hand. And the reality is, if that doesn't test well, okay. It didn't cost that much. Probably didn't take too long to think about or to create. And you can quickly iterate, which is the spirit of the process. And so low fidelity prototyping is especially important early in projects, especially as you're trying to break through some of the major sticking points of the design. As you get closer to some of the later stages, and as you're starting to talk to customers about this with test, high fidelity prototypes are often very useful to do so. So they look extremely close to what the final product looks like. They do require a little bit more time to produce, but there are also some side benefits to this as well. If you produce them well, and especially in conjunction with your development teams, very often there's shared code, shared CSS, HTML alongside of this that you can provide to your engineering teams, and you can reduce the need for things like red lines and others as designers that create efficiency, save more time, save more cost in the process. So once you kind of get used to this, there are some benefits to that, but it does take a little bit more time up front to get that started. So now that the prototype is built, regardless of low fidelity or high fidelity, we can now move into the final phase of design thinking, test. Testing allows you to get real-time feedback on your prototype so that you can quickly iterate your design, which narrows down your ideas as a result. Again, when you're looking at converging and diverging, this is where we narrowed down and picked the best solution from earlier in the process. We're really getting down to the one that we want to move forward with. So why is this important? Well, collecting feedback is the key to your success. With every iteration of your test, you can reduce potential issues in your design or prototype. The more iterations, the better. So how do we do it? So there's really two categories of research methods, quantitative and qualitative. So for the sake of Las Vegas, let's use a pint of beer, for example. So you can look at the same object from two different perspectives. Qualitative has a lot to do with the appearance, the feelings, the emotional qualities of it. So that pint of beer has a beautiful aroma color, sweet aroma, and a crisp finish. Sounds awesome. Who's thirsty, by the way? Quantitative looks at that exact same pint and sees the scientific qualities of the measurable data. It's 6 inches tall. It's got 16 ounces of liquid in it. And so again, looking from things from a multitude of perspectives is very important. And when you decide to pick a method in testing, you really need to look at these from the two major categories. In terms of methods, there are a couple subcategories to think about. Experts, behaviors, and attitudes. These are the type of methods to consider. The first one here is experts. So heuristic reviews are very often done by a usability professional or an agency. And reality is they take your product, take your design, and compare them against a standard set of rules. Does the product have help functionality? Does it allow you to recover from errors quickly? Does it help to maintain consistency or even standards? Expert reviews are very similar, but are often based on industry best practices or a common set of standards. These can be useful in a baseline evaluation as teams get started. The next set of methods are behavioral. So these three are very, very popular. So cognitive walkthroughs, again, sounds very fancy, but it really has to do with walking your prototype with real customers. You'll get feedback in the process. May not necessarily be task-driven, but it's really going to help you understand, again, the mechanics, the interactions of your solution that you just came up with through the previous steps in the process. User interviews are often, again, similar to what we just talked about in Empathize, but different. They have the prototype in hand. They're often one-on-one basis. They don't necessarily need to be in person, and they do take a modest amount of recruiting. So it's something that we don't cover a whole lot in this particular workshop. But make sure you spend some time recruiting. Make sure you look for folks who are really your target demographic, people who are really representative. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, both through online resources, agencies, friends and family, or others. But make sure you do that when you start thinking about things like user interviews, and the same could be said about the next one. Usability testing by far is our favorite. It's the most scientific method. The reality is it's driven by tasks, and it has limited interactions from a moderator. So with this method, you can measure task success, failure, and time it takes to complete. And also, you'd be able to be surprised how customers can use this design on their own through a method that we'll call thinking aloud. Very often you're having to pull information during some of these sessions, but when you ask your participants to think aloud, you'll really get a sense of what's on their mind, what are they considering before that next click. Even if it's on paper, what would they do next? And so in usability testing, there's some tricks of the trade that can help you get through and get some meaningful insights out of that. But again, similar to user interviews, you're using that prototype, but it's more scientific. You'll take a sample of about 10 or less to go through your solution relatively quickly and to produce some results. In addition to in-person testing, there are also solutions like usertesting.com and others that can make this effective for your business. One last note, so in terms of other research methods, there are also attitude-based ones as well. Surveys and focus groups are pretty popular. Word of caution, though, take the results from both of these with the right context. Very often, they're suggested by business teams or stakeholders to help evaluate ideas and designs. They can be good, but make sure you temper them and balance those with potentially research from user interviews or usability testing. You don't often get the difference between what and why. You'll hear what they say, but you don't know potentially why, and you start to make some dangerous assumptions along the way. So, but that said, with these approaches, they do offer new perspectives, and it's important again to take those into context. So in summary, design thinking is a process for innovation. We use it every day at Magento, and many other companies have adopted it recently. Anybody can do it. So far, these are just the basics. We don't expect everybody to become an expert afterwards, but I think this will at least give you a taste of what to expect. And we'll be spending the remainder of the time throughout the workshop with the activity section. So last but not least, as you can imagine, research fuels our process. I think we've talked to some of you in the past with regard to our research activities. We do have a booth in the marketplace, so Anne and others have been there throughout the day today. So if you're interested in helping us shape the future of the product, let us know. We'd love to talk to you about it. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Anne. She's going to get us started with the activity section of the workshop.
All right, so you may have noticed design thinking workbooks on your tables there. I'm Ann Hudsworth, and I'm a design manager at Magento. And as you'll notice, you have those workbooks, and we're going to now take you through the design process that Keith and Eric just presented. We've used the exercises in these workbooks in our own design processes at Magento, and we'd like to share these tools and techniques with you now. Here again is our agenda. I think we probably will blow through this pretty quickly, but I just want to point out that we have a break in a little bit, and we don't have our helpers with us, but we are available to answer questions, Keith, Eric, and I, if you just want to flag us down at any time during this exercise. So we'll be going through all 5 phases of design thinking with a large emphasis on test right now. To start off, I'd like to remind you of the concept of divergent and convergent thinking. In each of the 5 phases of the design thinking process, you're either generating ideas with divergent thinking or narrowing down or eliminating ideas with convergent thinking. And this back and forth enables the maximum creativity while driving for results. So in today's workshop, we'll be tackling a design problem we've all come up against: picking a mobile phone plan. I know, we've all been there. It's really difficult to pick a plan. So our design challenge today is to purchase a new mobile phone plan using your own mobile device that you currently have on you. We're hoping to find a plan that meets our needs and does not exceed our budget. All right, so the first design phase is empathize. And our goal is to objectively uncover and understand as many viewpoints as you can. And in order to create empathy, we need to have a beginner's mind and observe and listen without judgment. In our first activity, Let's think about our own mobile carriers for a minute. We've all gone through the wonderful task of trying to pick our own mobile phone plan that we currently have. Think about that process. Think about the pain points. Think about your relationship with that company, the touch points that you have with them, your feeling about the brand. Now stop cursing in your mind. But imagine that you now work for your mobile phone carrier and you want to improve the website. And we've circumvented some of the steps here, so we wanted to just show you a research summary of interviews we did with 8 customers. And just to highlight some of the sentiments, you'll see them there. Participant 1, unable to find a promotion on the website, was a little confused by all the options there. Number 3, not comfortable making the transaction online because they had multiple lines and they wanted to make sure that all of the different asks that they had were going to be accounted for, and they couldn't really do that online, so they wanted to talk to a real person. Participant 5 found a plan but wasn't confident that they had the best pricing. Really tech-savvy person, able to navigate the site, but just wasn't confident in that final price. As you can see, these are all very divergent views, but they have some things in common. And as you interview different customers, you'll find out that a lot of people have a lot of different ideas, and your job is to just collect all of them. And now we'll switch into a convergent mode in the define phase. And our goal here is to identify both user needs and business requirements in order to narrow down all of these opinions that you've heard. So now we're going to ask ourselves some questions that'll help us define the problem we're trying to solve. And this exercise, we'll discuss the root cause analysis and problem definition using some specific exercises here. This is the customer problem statement. So in the customer problem statement, we basically ask who, what, where, when, why, and we really explore who the customer is. So who is the customer? Well, I'm a mobile phone user. What is the customer's goal? To find a new plan that matches my needs. Why does this problem exist? Well, it's just difficult to choose a new phone plan. And what is the root cause? Well, we have this other exercise that really helps us get to that root cause. It's called the 5 whys. So first you start with the problem. What is the problem? It's difficult to choose a new phone plan. Why? I'm overwhelmed by options. Why am I overwhelmed by options? I can't find the right fit for my needs. Why can I not find the right fit for my needs? Well, the options offer services that I don't need. Why do these options offer services I don't need? They don't know exactly what I need. Why do they not know what I need? I'm not able to customize my own plan. Now, we came up with those just off the top of our head in our own explorations. You'll come up with your own. There's lots of different directions this can go, and you'll just take the time to figure out how you want to narrow that down. The last part of the define phase is the customer journey map. This visualization reflects the raw data that we collected in our customer interviews. We found that the low point there is in 3 in deciding on a plan. And because that was the low point, we used that to target the biggest pain point for our customer. And now I'm going to hand it back to Eric for the next phase.
Great. Thanks, Ann.
Yeah.
You're not done with me yet. So let's start generating some ideas. We're going to generate as many ideas as possible. So again, really take to heart what Ann covered in both empathize and define. Think about that. Think about that mobile phone carrier. Think about the problems and the opportunities there are with regard to that experience. You're trying to choose a plan. You're trying to customize that. Again, a lot of opportunities there. But before we get started, let's get ourselves in the right mindset. So generating a lot of ideas in a short amount of time can be really difficult. Can sometimes be stressful, but the reality is you want to keep an open mind. You want to stay optimistic and even be courageous in your thinking. Remember, again, there's no bad ideas. We really want to generate volume on this. So we're going to do this ourselves. So in this activity, we're going to use the method of rapid sketching that I described earlier, otherwise known as crazy eights. We're going to generate as many as 8 ideas in about 5 minutes. So 30 seconds apiece, 1 sketch, 30 seconds, 2 sketch, 30 seconds. It sounds like a lot. It's a lot of fun. And again, keep an open mind about it. And so in a room this size, we can generate hundreds of ideas in just a short amount of time. And you'll see for yourself, this might be something that you can bring back to your office when you get back. So what is this going to look like when we're completed? It could look something like this. So we're from Austin, Texas. We put this together back in the office right before we left, and around the similar problem, we went all through that curve I described. We went everywhere between brilliant to absurd to somewhere in between. Sketch 1 was a consultation on a couch. Sketch 2 was somewhere in the future, potentially a UFO involved. Not sure where that went. Sketch 3 kind of reined it back in. Again, we're starting to get a little bit more safe, a little bit more boring. May feel more like a comparison experience that you'd see in a mobile on a mobile site. Step 4 is more of a concierge type of service. Maybe there's something there. But again, you'll start to get the sense of the types of thinking. And what you'll see in maybe a more realistic example is some fashion of this maybe becomes a little bit more safe, and the ideas themselves will start to play off of each other as a result. So enough talking. Let's take a little bit of time and do this for ourselves. So if you haven't turned the page already, let's go ahead to get to page number 20 in your workbook. There should be 8 spots on here. Make sure you have a pen, Sharpie if that works for you as well, but pen might work just as well. So pick your preference there. And so we're going to think of a way to make things better. We're going to think about ways to make that phone customization, that choosing experience better. And then again, if you get stuck, think about those iterations. So any questions before we get started? Do we know what we're designing for?
Doesn't have to be website specific.
Doesn't have to be. So you saw we had some pretty crazy ideas that involved that was done to show some absurdity. But again, it's about that thinking for that. So, okay. Well, very good. Well, I'll have a stopwatch app here to keep us honest here. So look for my cues, and this will play some sounds as well as we get started. So without further ado, I'm going to begin a countdown, and we'll go ahead and begin. I know. We'll go ahead and get started. Let's get started with sketch number 1, please. Again, think about those conditions that Ann talked about in empathize and define. Think about those problems. All right, so let's switch gears. Let's talk about the prototype phase of design thinking. Again, we covered quite a bit of kind of what it might entail, what are the benefits, why we do it. But in the activities phase, we're going to do some pretending again. But first, let's talk about the types of prototypes again. So very often there are the ideas of physical prototypes, or something that's essentially an object, a paper prototype, which is that phone example that we showed earlier, and a digital prototype, which is something that you can create using HTML, CSS, even again PowerPoint or Acrobat, whatever that might be. In the end, a prototype is just a simulation of the product. It's also cheaper and made faster than the real thing. So for this activity, we're going to take a couple minutes identifying and familiarizing ourselves with the company, the mobile phone company that we identified earlier in the process. At this point, we've already started thinking about it. We've already started mapping some of the challenges with it. For the sake of pretend, that will be the prototype. In a real scenario, we'd have taken your ideas, we'd have made up some sort of prototype that's as a result of that, and tested that as well. This is a condensed version of this, so we'll all play along that the prototype is created for us. It's launched at something.com, and we'll be using our own mobile devices or tablets or laptops as moderators in the next phase using this site. So for the sake of this activity, go ahead and in your mind, whoever that carrier was that you identified, go ahead and write that in on step number 2. And if you haven't already, if you don't go to that site very often, we'll spend a couple minutes familiarizing yourself or reacquainting yourself with the site on how and what it takes to choose a plan. Because in time we may ask you to create some tasks around that. So let's take a minute or two to do that. So
Let's go ahead and start talking about the test phase. And if we're putting this into perspective, we spent a lot of time getting to learn our client. We came up with a lot of, we defined the problem, we came up with a lot of ideas, we built a prototype, we've potentially invested months of effort. At the very least, we've spent a week at this point. And now is the moment of truth. We get to decide we get to learn just how well we've done. And the test phase is what allows us to do that. Now, these are the various steps to create a usability test. Even with practice that we have, it generally will take us 2 to 3 weeks to prepare a good usability test. What I want to state here, though, is that it's really important that you follow the process. If you're not careful, it's very easy to accidentally engineer a test to get the exact results you were hoping to get. It's very easy to introduce your own bias into the system. And if at the end of this process all you're going to learn is what you already expected to learn or already know, then you've kind of wasted your time. It's not really a good use of your time. If you're going to ignore the findings or bias the test, just skip the test. So, now, when you're talking to someone through one of these user tests, we've provided a couple of tips and tricks here. What's most important to note is that you want to ask open-ended questions. Don't ask questions that can be easily answered with a yes/no answer. And most importantly, you want to really listen, right? Don't talk too much. You already know what you think. You didn't come here to learn that. You came to learn what the other person has to say. So listen. Ask open-ended questions, and ask questions that build on their previous statements. Also avoid leading. So let me give you an example of leading. Say the next step of the process you're testing happens to involve pushing a red button on the screen. Don't ask them if they see the red button. Don't mention the red button. Instead, ask them something open like, what would you do next? Don't ask about the red button. Now, it's also really important to note that it's kind of a strange situation. The person's volunteered their time, and they're sitting here across from a stranger who's asking them a bunch of random questions. And it becomes kind of natural for you, especially after you've run 10 tests in the course of a week. But don't forget how unusual of a situation it is for them. It's very important for you to establish their expectations. Here's what's going to happen. Here's how the test will go. Make them feel at ease. Also, you want to ask them if it's okay to record them, if you're going to record them. It's very important to get their permission. And keeping in mind that in this example, we're going to be asking about mobile phone carriers, for example. Before you get into the meat of the test, start asking them some general questions about their history or experience with shopping for mobile plans or their mobile carrier. You get their mind in the frame of thinking about shopping for mobile carriers that way. You don't just go cold turkey and throw them into the test. Now, we're actually, in this workshop, going to conduct a usability test, albeit a quick one. We want to get you a taste of it. These are the instructions. We'll just blast through these. I'll give you more detail as we go through. This is the usability test plan. You can actually think about it as a script. You can see the introduction there is that section I talked about getting them comfortable and establishing rapport. There's 3 questions here. And those are the 3 questions that you as the moderator are going to ask your participant. So earlier, Eric asked you to choose a site, a mobile plan, a mobile carrier. You want to go to that site now. Think of 3 questions you're going to ask someone, 3 tasks you'll ask them to do in the course of the test. And we'll actually conduct that test in short order here. So I'll give you just a few minutes. So review the site and think about the 3 questions you want to ask and write those down. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you. Now let's talk about the roles for the actual test when it comes down to conducting them. The first I want to talk about is the facilitator, otherwise called the moderator. This is the person who runs the test. The test plan you just filled out, that person is the person going off that script, reading those questions to the person taking the test. It's important to note those things I mentioned before. Asking open-ended questions, not leading. Always be listening and courteous and professional. I also want to stress this concept of thinking aloud. The more you talk, the more opportunity you have to introduce bias, and the more you're not listening because you're talking. A great technique to do this is to encourage the participant to do what we call thinking out loud, which is have them talk about whatever thought crosses their mind. What are you trying to do? What are you looking for? Help me understand what's going through your mind. Just have them continually talk about what it is they're trying to do. And you'll get a great amount of insights just from this technique alone. Another role is the note taker. Being professional, managing these questions, not leading, takes a surprising amount of energy. Moderating can be harder than you think. And there's a lot of things that you can miss. So I recommend taking a note taker. This person is taking notes during the whole session, and you get an added benefit. At the end of the day, you guys can debrief each other, listen to what each other said, and often you'll catch things that you didn't hear in the session immediately. It's very useful. And finally, the participant. That's the person actually taking the test. Now, we've provided here a basic template to capture your notes in the session today. So the note taker will be writing notes down here. The moderator will be using the test plan that we filled out just a moment ago. We've also provided an additional sheet for overflow notes should you like to use it. And this is how the test is going to go. What I'm going to ask you to do is form teams of 3. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Looks like we may have one group of 2. So form teams of 3. And the test will go like this. One of you will be the moderator, one of you the note taker, one of you the participant. The moderator will be testing the site that they chose and wrote their questions for. After some time, I have 10 minutes here, but we'll actually use less time than that. I've seen today people have been finishing in about 6 to 7 minutes. I think that number probably works for everyone. So we'll be targeting just about 5 minutes to give you a taste of this. We'll run the test for just about 5 minutes. Stop, repeat, switch roles, and run it again. So everyone will be the moderator once, the note taker once, and the participant once. And then we can talk about your experience that you've had running the test. So any questions before we get started? Everybody ready? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. All right. Thank you, guys. Let's start.